Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Ken.
Evening.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 445 of Line Upon Line. Forsaking Godliness leads to forsaking of political and cultural wisdom. And everyone say hi to Tom Griffith and Michael Armstrong, our guests for this evening. And as always, my friend on the other end, Dr. Rick. So if you would start us out, Dr. Ricks, that would be wonderful.
Okay, these are jokes that somewhat involve or celebrate feminism. A modern woman. The woman says to her date, "Tell me, Donald, do you think I'm too aggressive and bossy? I want a straight answer, and I want a straight answer now." By the way, you realize there's only one answer to that question.
Yeah, don't answer.
Only one honest answer.
Don't answer.
Yeah.
Do I look fat in this dress? Never mind. One answer. Another feminist joke. One lady is not happy with feminists. She says, "I'm furious about these women liberationists we see on TV. They keep going on soapboxes and proclaiming that women are brighter than men. That's true, but we should keep it very quiet. It ruins the whole racket." You don't want the men to find out that the women are smarter than they are. Okay, this is one kind of relatively same thing called flexibility. The manager says, "I'm sorry, I can't hire you." To the man, yeah, these are jokes that mean men aren't too bright. Anyway, "I can't hire you. We just don't have enough work to keep you busy." The man says, "You'd be surprised how little it actually takes."
Oh, man.
That might be truer in this world than you think. I've heard all kinds of stories about employers find a hard time to get people that are ambitious and hardworking and, well, anyway. Right, Ken? As a management person, he knows what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Okay, we're going
definitely
to go ahead.
it's definitely there's a lot of people that like to do as little as possible just to get by, have as much fun, and do as little as possible, I guess.
Yeah. I didn't take this job to end up working hard.
We had a guy, and evidently there's a word for this. I can't remember what it is. He would come in every day. He drug in a briefcase on wheels, would unload the briefcase full of paper in his office. His whole office would be cluttered with papers. At the end of the day, he had done nothing, and he would gather all the paper up, put it away, and he got paid for a year and a half for doing that, and nobody called on to him. I watched him do it every day.
Wow. He knew how to look busy, huh?
Yep.
That's horrible.
Actually, a teenager told me this. He said, "I want an easy job. That's what I want." And they meant it in a certain kind of way. I think I know how they meant it. They didn't mean, "I want to be an accountant," in case you think that's easy. I think I know how they meant it. But they were serious. I thought, wow. Admitting that out loud would be embarrassing if this were 50 years ago, but not anymore, right? For all you accountants out there, I don't believe accounting is necessarily an easy job. I mean, if that's what you think, sitting at a desk doing paperwork, that's not what they meant by easy job, I don't think. Okay, so here's my hypothesis, just by looking at things in the Bible. And this is mostly the people in general, but specifically the leadership. When the leadership turns away from God, starts moving more towards secularism, paganism, God doesn't matter, we can elaborate further. Their decision making gets worse and worse and worse. And I know you're going to say it was because God doesn't bless them. That's a factor. But I really think their decision making, it's like, if you look at it this way, if God, like if you had a bad kid, I mean a really bad kid, his dad, I don't want to hear anything you say about anything. I know how to run my life. I know better than you people have been around for 60, 70, 80 years. I'm 14 and I'm wise beyond my years. You realize if you said, okay, it's almost like that, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
go ahead. Were you going to say something, Michael?
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was going to say the problem with society, and especially in our leadership, most of the time, is the lack of humility in individuals. Once you lack humility and become arrogant, it's like it says in Romans, be not wise in your own conceits. That their seeming knowledge of what they know seems to overtake them. It's like hubris. You learn something and you think you're really good at it, when in reality you're really not as good as you think you are. But humility, and the Bible says, in Proverbs, it says the fear of the Lord is, let me see here, I got it somewhere. The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor is humility. Without a humble mind and attitude, you cannot be used by God. And he's going to ignore those that are arrogant. In fact, it says that in many places.
I think you could tie in what Dr. Ricks was saying about people not wanting to work hard or wanting the easiest job possible with another scripture. It's like lovers of ease and lovers of pleasure more than they're interested in doing what's right or in serving God or providing.
It comes from the parenting that we have today. My parents worked hard. They taught me the same thing. I wasn't allowed to just laze around the house, or I had to do whatever they told me to do, and that was chores, whatever. Parents are not like that today. This generation does not have to work for anything. They get catered to.
That's why we can't get help. We can't hire anybody. They show up the first day and you never see them again, if they show up the first day.
Your job isn't pleasant enough?
I guess not.
I just teasing you. But
Maybe you could advertise, it's really easy.
yeah, it's really easy.
It's all fun and games, right? Yeah, I was thinking about something that you said, Tom. Remind me of something historical about hubris. And I may forget the guy. I think he was from somewhere in Scandinavia. He invaded Russia and went into winter disaster. Napoleon, even though people warned him about it, I won't go into details, he went all the way to Moscow. And the winter, it was just horrible what the winter did to his grand army. The biggest army, at least up to that point in history, had ever been put together in Europe. And Hitler did the very same thing. Maybe there's some differences, but the differences aren't that great. They all had this idea that they were unbeatable. They couldn't, and they made stupid mistakes. I would argue that we will see that in the history of nations that should know God. As we get away from God, you're going to see more stupid decisions.
We're seeing them today, obviously, in the leadership. And we are unique. And I will always hold to this, that America is unique among nations in that we choose our leadership. And I know that God decides who he wants in leadership, but I firmly believe that God is listening to the people of this country to see if they're going to make the right or the wrong decisions, or the best decision that you can, based upon the circumstances.
By the way, Elizabeth Cheney gave herself the Abraham Lincoln treatment. She said, well, Lincoln lost that big Senate race before he became president. You realize, actually, the truth is Lincoln got 53% of the vote, but because of the way the legislature was structured, the other guy got the job. But actually, it was God's will, because if Lincoln had been a senator, he would never have run for president when he did. And he was, actually, there are a lot of good things I can say about Lincoln, but he was the man for the moment. All those other politicians would not have been able to do what he did. His getting assassinated made things worse, but you can't have everything. But I don't believe anybody else. That war actually went bad the first year and a half of the Union. Lincoln proved himself smarter than anybody gave him credit for. And I can see God made that happen. And Liz Cheney is no Abraham Lincoln.
Oh, that's for sure.
Anyway.
There's a good example of arrogance
right
there.
Big time. Yeah, buddy.
You get clobbered in an election to that extent, and you're going to run for president?
37 points.
That's a good example of hubris.
37 points. I mean, that's just trouncing.
And she had more money for advertising. So I guess money doesn't guarantee victory, but it certainly helps. And she had more money, a lot more money. At any rate, let's go to Psalms 37:3, please, Ken.
Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of the man who brings wicked schemes to pass.
By the way, there are tons of scriptures and Psalms we could have quoted. I just picked that one. And others that, there are blessings in doing things God's way. And a lot of times, evil men seem to get blessed with their decisions. But if you look at Psalms carefully, God is saying it's temporary. Don't envy their temporary success. You might think, man, these guys are evil and bad, and it works. Everything works for them. At some point, it'll catch up with them. Maybe I don't know when, where, and how, but I really believe that. The wicked don't really get away with it. They just think they do.
Yeah, even if it's temporary, or even if there's a temptation to covet that kind of lifestyle or what they've accumulated temporarily, you have to not.
I believe.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, where it says wait on the Lord, we need to do that today. We kind of get in a mindset of, well, the world's about to end. It couldn't get any worse than this. Yeah, it could get a lot worse than this, and it could take quite a few years to get to that point. So we don't need to give up on God, thinking, well, God has forsaken us and it's all coming to an end now. We need to be diligent in prayer and stay faithful, because God decides when things will happen, not us.
And if you are bent on the fact that Christ is returning soon and he doesn't, you can have a chance of falling victim to becoming cold-hearted towards everything. I forget, there's a verse, I read it last week and I can't remember it, but there is a verse that talks about that you need to avoid that because you'll become callous, that he hasn't come. And then I think it says you will drink with the drunkards, and goes on that you'll just kind of lose heart.
Terry Gooch was telling me, I think it was Wednesday on the phone, Springfield is not that far. Springfield, Missouri is not that far from Oklahoma. This guy thought, because of what the man said, the world was coming to an end. It was about 8 years ago. So he went to this compound in Oklahoma to get ready for the end. You realize that it hasn't happened, and it is, well, it's kind of disillusioning. I don't know what will ultimately happen to the guy, but you see the problem, don't you? Mm-hmm. Sell all your stuff, bring your money, and go to some compound because the end is coming. Well, I won't guarantee that God won't have us do that someday, but I'd be very cautious before I did anything like that. Super cautious. Wouldn't you agree, Ken?
Yeah, I would say that doesn't sound like how he operates.
And I know a guy, a young man who, was it 2 years ago? He put some money into a project to go off in the hills with some guns and beans and hide out because the world was going to terrible crisis. Well, he was talked out of going, but some people went. Obviously, Now, I'm not saying the world isn't worse than it was a few years ago, but it ain't. I just think that's a bad way to think.
And nowhere in the Bible does it say to do that.
Well, it's the epitome of arrogance to believe that you can predict when the end's coming, when the Creator himself, Jesus Christ, said no one knows except the Father
Yep.
of that day and hour.
It's escapism.
So it's like going to Vegas. You might as well go to Vegas and bet all your money on, the worst odds you can find, because you're going to lose.
Yep. It's escapism, just like the rapture. It's the same mindset, is trying to avoid everything. Nowhere it doesn't say that you're to do that.
Oh, I was listening to, I know we're off the subject, but I listened to Christian radio I think it was last Sunday or Sunday before. They have some programs about prophecy, and a lady and some guys on there, and they're all pushing the rapture. They could have it at any moment. We'll be raptured, and the world will go to HELL, and we'll be raptured. We'll be sitting on a cloud watching all that. We'll be safe. You know there's something wrong with that, the thinking behind that, don't you, Ken?
Oh, yeah, obviously.
And Tom and Michael. But they push a lot of that. And they say things like, well, the rapture and Christ could come at any minute. We all know enough about prophecy to know that could not happen.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely, there's plenty of scriptures that give you some indication of how things are going to be at the end, and certainly a time of trouble that's worse than any time before in history is a pretty serious thing. I mean, there's plenty of very horrible times in history, and although things do seem bad at times, I don't think you can honestly make an argument that it's worse than ever before, even if it's heading that way.
And we don't have the third temple, and we don't have the man of sin or the false prophet. I know that God could make that stuff happen quickly, but until they happen, Christ cannot come back. Would you agree? And there are probably a couple other prophecies I haven't thought of yet. The abomination of desolation. I think a couple others, but they haven't happened yet. So he's not coming back tonight.
No. And I've got cousins, a cousin and an uncle, and they kind of feel that it could return at any time. And I told my cousin, I said, well, if she asked a question, evidently she didn't really expect an answer. So I answered her in the way any of us would answer her. And she rejected it out of hand because she wants him to come back anytime. And so all these things have to happen, and we haven't seen any of this stuff yet. And as bad as things are today, in 5 years we'll look at today and say these are the good old days.
I remember actually thinking to myself, we went back 15 years. It's hard to believe. A lot of things, especially you go to the grocery store and a bunch of other places, they look like the good old days now, don't they? We didn't think that at the time, but you know what I mean, Ken?
Yep.
I went and bought something today. It was a minor thing. It is 54% more expensive than it was maybe 8 or 9, 10 months ago. It's not an earth-breaking thing. I'm fine, but I thought, wow, isn't that a shocker? It's easy to calculate because the way the price get the percentage increase. But wow, and probably nobody's even shocked anymore.
Well, here, eggs, 18-count eggs are 400% more expensive than they were 2 years ago.
You're kidding? 400%?
They were $1 for 18 eggs. They're now $4 for 18 eggs.
And if you want a shock,
sorry, they're actually more than that. They're almost $5 for 18 eggs.
Well, I sell them for $3.50 a dozen, but I don't think they'd handle the shipping.
And it could get worse. Ken, would you read 5, 18, and 20 for a minute?
Woe to
Isaiah.
Woe to those who draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin as if it were a cart rope. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter.
I realize that sweet for bitter and bitter for light, but you realize they're actually teaching things that are the opposite of what we would have said 10 years ago. I mean, literally opposite of what we would have said 10 years ago. It's like, have a judgment of the world gone crazy?
Yeah.
The crazies have always been here. We just allowed them to get into leadership. That's our fault.
And they're leading education in the media. So it's out in your face, right? This guy, but he was joking, but he wasn't joking. He was talking about cis normal male. This is not to offend any of you guys, but he says if you're a heterosexual male and you're white, you are the worst kind of person in the world. And being heterosexual, we call them cis hetero or something, is really bad. In other words, what we would have called normal is now bad. And he was serious. I'm not making this up. He was on TV the other day. Have I shocked you, Ken?
No.
And Michael, did I get that wrong? Was it
cisgender? Yeah, that's means normal. Means normal.
Yeah. Normal is dull and boring and bad.
Well, they changed there is no more normal. See, they've changed the linguistics, so there is no more normal. They eliminated normal. That's why they eliminate whatever you just said. There is no normal.
Yeah.
And mothers are birthing persons. And by the way,
otherwise it would be confusing, right?
Yeah, I can't keep up with any of it because they're adding everything under the sun now. I mean, people are calling themselves cat gender. It's nuts.
Oh, yeah, that's right. They're telling kids in school, the other kids, you must pretend that he's a kitty cat if that's how he identifies.
Yeah, that's going on right here in the high school here where I live. They had and I know this firsthand knowledge, they had a child come in that had his hair too long. You can't have it touching the collar or the shoulders, one or the other. So they brought him in the office. They made his mother come to the office and cut his hair there, why she agreed to do that, I have no idea. But yet they'll allow other teens to wear furry ears because they want to be cats that day, or, whatever. So, think about that for a minute. I mean, that's the crazies are running the insane asylum. I mean, that's beyond belief that you worry about a child's hair length, but yet it's okay for you to come with cat ears on because today you believe you're a cat.
Would you read Isaiah 5:21, please, Ken, the next scripture?
Absolutely. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight, who justify the wicked for a bribe and take away justice from the righteous man. Therefore, as the fire devours the stubble, and their blossom will ascend like dust, because they have rejected the law of the Lord of hosts and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel.
There's a joke, and the joke goes like this. Why would God allow children to be shot in school? And the way the joke goes, we kicked God out of school 50 years ago. And you might argue that. But there's some truth to that joke. I forgot when they officially outlawed prayer in public school and some other stuff. Do you know that they cannot fully quote Martin Luther King speeches because as a Protestant minister, he throws a little bit of Bible in there. Not a lot, just a little bit. They can't allow that in public school. I'm not making this up. Because it's not, it's like, are you kidding me? And they don't use his title REV because, see, that brings in the cleric.
I read a couple of days ago that the Bible, this is somewhere in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. The Bible is among a number of books that have been removed from a school library pending review, with the argument being that in some of the more gruesome instances that occur in it, but still they pull it out of the library where it's not even available in there.
And I bet you they have horror books and all kinds of gruesome stuff in libraries and maybe even pornography. That'd shock you, right?
What was interesting to me was that they accused it of, the Bible deals with a lot of unsavory things that happen, but it doesn't mean that it's condoning them or that it's promoting them or that's what you should do. That's certainly not the message. But because it covers them, they say, oh, well, it says that you should, do this, that, and the other thing, and pillage and rape and so on and so forth, which is, far, far, far from the truth. But that's it. It was amazing to me how many people that seemed to believe that.
Well, that's not the real agenda. The real agenda is just to get the Bible out of the school. They're not worried about what the Bible talks about, chopping heads off or cutting off the foreskins of Philistines or whatever. They're not worried about that. Their real agenda is just to get God out of there. They don't want the Bible there.
I bet you'll find the Quran.
Probably so.
By the way, that statement that said wise in their own eyes? That's one of the dangers of our society. I remember Ronald Reagan's famous quote. They were asking him about different things, and he said, well, the problem with liberals, well-educated liberals, they know so much that's not true.
Yeah, who said that? Who did you say said that?
Ronald Reagan said that.
Yeah.
They know so much, it's just not true.
They're stupid, smart people.
Yeah, they're smart and stupid. It's like this thing about fossil fuels. Germany's already proven that windmills don't work. They're not reliable. I won't go into all the details. I only remember some of them, and they're pulling back on them. But if we have a cold winter, some of these people crazy enough, they don't care if Americans freeze or. Does that make sense? Your ideology goes beyond common sense and safety. Fossil fuels work. By the way, in super cold weather, the most reliable fuel is atomic fuel and coal-fired generators. And that make old-fashioned coal-fired, or if you want to go for, but the problem with the atomic, you have that built well in advance. You can't just turn it up at the last minute. Those are the ones that work best in really bad weather.
It's not about what works. Anything that they come up with that worked that they would reject. Natural gas. Remember we found that natural gas field. Natural gas was going to be solution. They talked about natural gas cars. Natural gas is plentiful. We had enough for, hundreds of years. They reject that now too. They reject anything that gives this this capitalist country, cheap, plentiful energy. Because if you have cheap, plentiful energy, capitalism thrives. And they don't want capitalism to thrive. They want to shut it down. If wind power worked, they'd reject it because it kills too many birds. If solar worked, they would reject it for whatever reason. Whatever it worked. If you could put up a solar panel the size of a hood of a 72 Buick and power your whole house, they would reject it because it worked. They only allow what doesn't work.
And by the natural gas is the least polluting of any fuel, is that right?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
But they still don't want to use it. I've heard that some of the real big leaders originally, way back, they pushed it because they can't just openly say socialism, communism. Their reputation's been hurt. So they want to micromanage the economy, but their excuse will be global warming to micromanage and not socialism, communism. But it's almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? Hydrogen works. They reject that too. And the result of hydrogen burning is water vapor.
It's been an interesting side effect, I think, of what's gone on in Europe in regards to Russia's sanctions and all that, in that Europe has had to dial back a lot of their green initiatives and a lot of their plans to close things down, be it coal or nuclear. They've had to postpone those, at least put some of them off indefinitely. They've been forced to make a practical decision that if those gas supplies were in fact cut off, that they would still need electricity. Go figure.
And by the way, do you remember somebody told them about 2.5 years ago, you're getting most of your energy from your enemy? Is that smart? And they chuckled at him.
Yeah, that was Trump.
Wasn't it Liz Cheney that said that?
No.
No.
But they're not chuckling now because the Russians are playing games with their energy supply. I don't know what will happen ultimately, but they can see the danger, right? Winter is coming, and who knows what the Ruskies may or may not do about their energy supplies. By the way, if America was energy independent and had an excess, we were shipping it, America could take a lot of that, and the prices would be a lot lower. If only we used our own stuff. What a shame. Oh well, I'm getting off the subject, but I want to mention foolish decisions. You see the foolishness of it, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at two historical examples. The northern kingdom of Israel made a blunderous decision that I want to mention it because I think it relates to them moving away from God as an example to us. By the way, both houses of Israel were drifting away from God, and prophets warned them. But the northern 10 fell first, like 3 generations, 120 plus years faster than Judah did, and more permanently, because they had a counterfeit religion. So they changed the Feast of Tabernacles dates, got rid of the priest who knew the Bible, and got all kinds of people who didn't know anything teaching it. My only point is, I think that's an example of moving. Let's go to Isaiah 6:9 first, Ken.
And he said, "Go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and return and be healed."
I know that scripture is kind of confusing, but I think, at least in part, God is saying, if these people have a bad heart and they don't want to know the truth, they don't want to obey, I'm going to let them, it's like you see the problem, but you don't really see it.
I like the story of Jeroboam. It strikes me as being ironic because he's told by a prophet that he's going to get most of the kingdom of Israel after Solomon's gone. He waits it out in Egypt for a little while. He comes back after it comes to pass, like it happens, he gets it. And then instead of being humble or believing God, he trusts in his own wisdom and says, oh, you know what? I need to change everything up and, set up a golden calf here and there and, make my own feast days and do all this stuff, or the people are going to go back. Well, in the first place, God told him he was going to receive the kingdom. Why didn't he just trust in God to preserve it? It's like, maybe God was going to make a way out from under the sin and the idolatry that was already being practiced in all of Israel through him, but instead he turned right back into it as if that were the solution when it was the problem in the first place. That's the whole reason he got control, was because they were engaging in that sort of thing.
And I know we all know this, but the Northern 10 never could kick that the bad priest, the golden calves, the change calendar, and they probably changed other things too, truth be known. They could never kick that. And that's part of why they drifted away from God much faster than Judah did.
Mm-hmm.
And
true.
They never had a really good leader. Judah had a number of good leaders because Judah was closer to God. They never had a good leader. Some were worse than others, but they never had a really good one. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. For hundreds of years.
Let's look at Psalms 51:13. Yeah, that's what I meant, Isaiah 5:13. I'm sorry, I said.
Okay, you had me guessing again. Therefore, my people. I thought I had made a mistake again.
My bad.
No, that's all right. Therefore, my people have gone into captivity because they have no knowledge.
If someone were to ask you, I'll ask Tom first. How much real knowledge of America being blessed by God do you think the average person has nowadays?
Well, depends on what generation you're talking about. If you're talking about your generation, Ken, sorry, Michael, I'm going to leave you out for right now.
That's okay.
You're the exception to the rule, I'm sure. But, the older the generation is, the more they understand the history of this country and how it was founded. And also, I think a lot of it has to do with how close they are to God. So, when I say close to God, I don't mean members of the church necessarily. I mean, were they raised believing in God? Did they go to some sort of a church? Do they believe in God? And if you believe in God, you can't look at the history and put the two together and realize that they didn't go hand in hand. When you really read about the history of how this country was founded and how it came from so far behind in the odds, what kind of people led the country? First of all, Washington and all the others that you can name that were so wise. These were not stupid, arrogant people. They were very humble and wise people. And so God used them for that reason. He knew they weren't the type of person like Jeroboam who was going to go do things in his own idea of right. Washington constantly sought out God in his decisions and prayed and asked for help. So if you know all of that, then the average person does understand from that perspective. The generation today, they're not even given history in school anymore. I learned all about the Bill of Rights. I read about things that happened during the Revolutionary War that they probably don't even know what the Revolutionary War is today. That's a long answer. Sorry.
A good answer. Any comments, Ken?
No, I pretty much go along with that. I think the number of people who understand that is minute. If you took, I bet of the population of this country, I'll bet you less than 10% understand any of what Tom just said.
I've seen, I think Jesse Waters, but I saw it in a few other shows. They be walking around major parks in New York City, some in Miami Beach, and they would ask questions like, who did America have to defeat to win our independence? They would get answers like North Korea. I'm not kidding. The answers would, and other basic questions, and they didn't know what the Bill of Rights was. I mean, they knew nothing. You talk about lack of knowledge, and I'm not going to get into Bible knowledge. I mean, just general Bible knowledge. I'm sure that would be, if they dared ask questions like that, it'd be even worse. Don't you agree?
If you ask them who won the Revolutionary War on the street, your answer will get like France.
Depends on whose revolution you're talking about.
I know.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really a lack of knowledge, Bible knowledge, but other related knowledge is really getting greater and greater in this country. And if you don't have knowledge, you cannot make really good decisions, can you?
Yeah.
Nobody reads anymore. Well, they read, but they read the wrong things on the internet. Social media is the worst of anything that could have happened to this country or to people. And I don't like the internet. We use the internet as a tool, great, fine, but we'd be much better off without the internet. Cell phones, you name it. That technology has done us in. And no one reads anymore. They don't even teach how to write cursive in school anymore. I saw a documentary about Winston Churchill the other night. And when he was a young child, I mean, I'm not talking teenager either, before his teens, they showed a letter he wrote to an uncle. And the penmanship in this letter was far beyond anything I've ever seen. And this was this child that did this. And Winston Churchill was very well read. He knew history. He knew the history of his own family. And he read constantly. And no one does that anymore. No, there's no knowledge. Not just absence of knowledge of God. There's just no knowledge amongst the younger generations, period.
Yeah, it's interesting how the freedoms that this country has, that the founders, based on, it meant something to them that it doesn't seem to mean in public any longer. The freedom of religion being so important, coming from a society that was, you were forced to pay tithes to the Church of England, the Anglican Church, which is, you could it's might as well be Catholicism. It's just the king instead of the Pope, right? It's not utterly different. It's not a system that the people who came over here really believed in or tried to establish in very many instances. And that's now these freedoms that were so valuable, that meant, your own conscience and being able to do what's right, and, to do things like we do, like keep the Sabbath and things like that would not be allowed. You'd be a heretic, and so on and so forth, have come to mean, freedom has come to mean a whole lot more than that, and has been applied to a lot of weird stuff that was never, ever intended in the first place. Not even close.
Oh, many of the people that founded this nation early on, we're talking about during the, believe just after the Pilgrims, many of those that came from England that were persecuted because of their religious beliefs. A lot of the groups that came here were Sabbath keepers, if you read the history. And I mean, there is even such a thing as a Seventh-day Baptist, believe it or not, way back then.
I've seen an occasional church here and there with that on it. That's an interesting concept.
So if you think of it that way, the founding of this nation was really, it was God led these people over here, so that, for what purpose? Well, you might look at it this way. This great nation was established so that God's church could do a work, because that work could not be done over there the way it was at that time. And in many ways, in many countries, you couldn't do it still today.
Oh, that's true. And other, obviously other major contributions to world events and history and things like that. I mean, in wars of the 20th century, I mean, without the United States of America, the world would have taken a massively different trajectory. But in the same light of what you said, it preserves a lot of that, not just here, but in a lot of other nations as well.
Yeah, when they accomplish their goal of bringing the United States down to the level of the rest of the world, it will be a world that many people will not want to live in anymore.
We're starting to move in that direction.
That is the goal.
Getting rid of Trump. I'm not saying it's that simplistic, but by the way, if you ever look at the people against Netanyahu and Trump, you see the same spirit, and they rend up what I call overly prosecutorial charges against Netanyahu as well. And there's a chance he may get to come back in there. I won't go into all that at the moment, but there's one guy from Israel. He says the far left, they have their own, ideas what they want Judah to be and America to be. They will not let Trump and Netanyahu get back in power. They will do anything, whatever it takes to stop them. And my point is, now that Trump and Netanyahu are out of the picture, can you see the peace and stability is going down in the world? I'm not saying it's as bad as it could get or will get someday. But don't you see the downward trend already?
Yep.
Yeah, and I guess we'll just have to wait to see if God's okay with that, or if he wants to put it back in some other direction.
But if Netanyahu wins re-election, it's a tie in the Knesset now. And I think it's October or
this fall.
November. If he wins re-election, I know that's only one small nation, but that's a good sign. Israel in the middle, it's still a positive sign. I mean, I'm not saying Netanyahu's perfect, but he's strong on the defense of Israel. And on his bucket list, it's way down on his bucket list, though, is building a third temple. I recognize he probably can't do it politically for a while, but he is still a very non-progressive, non-liberal, because they're the ones that really kind of want to push the Bible aside. And Israel, Jewish people are a lot more liberal, even the ones in America. I got one that's sort of a sister-in-law of sorts. They're a lot more liberal. than you think they are. You wouldn't believe some of the stuff that comes out of her mouth. Hope she never sees this, but probably not. I doubt she'd even listen to this stuff.
You lost her with the feminist jokes there at the beginning.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm sure I did. Oh, and is she bossy? Oh, I can't say that.
Don't dig it any deeper. Just let it go.
You know, we need to try to elect people that want to do the right thing. Nobody's perfect. There had never been a perfect leader. I think God wants to see people that want to do the right thing, even if they don't understand the truth like we do. It's like it says, and I forget which book. Paraphrasing, when the Gentiles do those things that are in the law, they are a law unto themselves.
Yep.
God just cares that you do what the law says to do. That's what he wants. And so if leaders try to do the right thing, and we try to elect those people, I think God recognizes that.
I heard a guy on Christian radio. There are a lot of, I call them liberal Christians, who say, oh, we don't need to vote for Trump and whatever, and other stuff. They don't need to discuss abortion, and those issues are too divisive. He said, for instance, if Hillary had won the election in 2016, Roe versus Wade would be solidified, and every Supreme Court decision for the next generation would be far left. And if you know anything about the kind of judges she would have appointed, you know that's true.
Yeah.
And that's just one thing. The lesser of, people say, well, the lesser of two evils is not that big a deal. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
The lesser of two evils can make a big deal.
Yeah, it can. It's even the practical knowledge thing that came up a few minutes back. It's funny. So we have freedom, we get to choose our leaders and all that. And so for a while you go this way, and then no, you go really hard back the other way. It seems foolish that in such important areas as even foreign policy, America's role in the world, and how we're going to be prosperous, and things that should seem like it would be easy to agree on, we're diametrically opposed most of the time. That there are two halves that in no way agree with one another. And what kind of face that presents to the world? You could just wait for 4 years, wait it out, and then things are going to go back, and we'll get it rolling again, or vice versa. Depending on which other country's point of view we're talking about. It's unstable. Almost.
Well, the dividing line has never been as sharp as it is now.
Right.
And so there was always, as liberal as Clinton was, he was far closer to a conservative than what we're dealing with today. Yeah. And then back then he was way too liberal for an awful lot of people. I didn't care for him. So we have gone to a new world in this country, and it's just, by the day it gets more partisan. It just gets more, the line between the two sides is getting more defined, and less people falling out in the middle, or that I don't know or I don't care. Everybody's picking a side, it seems like.
Yeah.
Hey, in a way, Israel was kind of that way, or those kings, when you get a good king and you go the right direction, and then you get a bad king and you go
exactly
hard the other direction. Then you get a good king and you go back to, it was kings doing it rather than the people, but it's kind of the same thing.
Exactly the same thing.
We decide our leaders. We choose the wrong one. It's our fault.
Yeah.
We choose the right one, or a better one, I should say. Go the other direction, but I still fall back on the concept that God is looking towards us to do the right thing, and whether it be by the law according to the church, how we do, or whether it be the people according to who they select for the. I know there's a concept or an idea that we shouldn't vote because we're interfering with God's decisions. I don't believe you can interfere with God's decision. He's going to if he wants to put someone in power, he's going to put them in power no matter what we do. He'll make it happen somehow. But I do believe if he sees within enough of us the desire to choose someone who, for example, doesn't believe in abortion over someone who does, I think he would recognize that we are trying to do the right thing.
Exactly. I think that's the way. The way you describe it, I think, is exactly right. If you vote for someone who is going to take America in a more conservative and more of something God would agree with, even if he didn't want that person in charge, at least we voted in the direction that seemed most likely that God would accept. Even if he didn't want that person, we don't know that. We're doing what's right, so he's going to put the other whatever person he wants in. But now, if we're voting the other way for a no good, rotten, person that's going to degrade the country and destroy Christianity as best they can, then there's a problem. Even if he wants that guy in, you're not on God's side.
I was talking to my Catholic neighbor, a nice person, and I said, the fact that Roe v. Wade has been overturned is probably going to save several 100,000 babies next year. That is a big deal, and it probably will. Well, I guess we will see, but I probably will.
Yep. I think we got a lot of
because a lot of them done out of convenience. Well, they can go across the border, 2-3 states down and get abortion. Yes, but if it's not so convenient, a lot of them will just have the baby.
Yep.
You wait and see.
Yep. We still got, I think, quite a few verses to go through.
Yeah, we better speed up. Can you 2 Kings 17:3.
Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against him, and Hosea became his vassal and paid him tribute money. And the king of Assyria uncovered the conspiracy by Hosea, for he had sent messengers to So, king of Egypt, and brought no tribute to the king of Assyria as he had done year by year.
We can make it short. The Assyrian Empire was the big bad guy in the planet in those days, and most of the states in that area, except for Egypt, had to be vassal kingdoms and pay heavy tribute taxes to him, and they promised to do so. And when they found out he was conniving with the Egyptians, the next verse says, "Therefore the king of Assyria shut him up and had him put in prison." And then, he kind of let him go, but eventually the Assyrians found out that the northern 10 were going to rely on Egypt instead of paying that high tribute. And you know what happened, don't you? That was a bad political decision, and the northern 10, it was a terrible 3-year siege of Samaria, but the city was destroyed, and they went into captivity, never to come back again.
Mm-hmm.
Bad decision. Now let's go to Judah. Judah makes the very same mistake. Can you read, even though they lasted 120 years longer because he had good kings like Zechariah, let's just read 2 Kings 18 about the good king they had.
Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hosea, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, and according to all that his father David had done.
And they were spared from Assyrian conquest, and they lived in prosperity for a great many years. And then Zedekiah came on the throne. He went, as years went on, deeper and deeper into paganism. They're like vultures, like wizards and witches and sorcerers, preying on the people's superstition. They got rid of the good priest in the temple, really turned the nation into decadence, sacrificing their babies. And sure enough, now a new empire from the same area as Babylon, Assyria, the Babylonians, defeated them, and they took over. And they were now the big stick in the world. And they arrested the king and made him promise to pay tribute to Babylon. And it's an interesting story. Let's read the next verse.
Chronicles. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against him and bound him in bronze fetters to carry him off to Babylon.
The very same thing that happened to the Northern 10 when they started being disloyal to him. And trying to make alliances with Egypt. By the way, Egypt secured their own borders, but they proved to be a weak ally for Samaria and fairly similar for Judah. Let's read 2 Chronicles 36.
He did evil in the sight of the Lord his God and did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. And he also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear an oath by God, but he stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord God of Israel.
And Jeremiah is a good book. Jeremiah explains in detail. It'll be easier if you surrender to the Babylonians. You made a bad deal, getting an alliance with Egypt. And, Jeremiah elaborates, and they, of course, didn't want to hear it. But you can guess what happened, can't you? After the second time that they, as the Babylonians considered, double-crossed them and said, we're not sending more tribute. We're allying ourselves with Egypt, and us and Egypt together can defeat you. Well, they sieged Jerusalem for a long time. The Egyptians didn't do a thing. Finally, they withdrew from the Jerusalem, and they thought we won, but they didn't know for sure. He had to actually ask Jeremiah what happened. The Egyptians finally came out to battle. They met the Babylonians and quickly saw how strong they were and ran back to Egypt. And the Egyptians didn't pursue them, just like Jeremiah warned. They're going to come back and finish you off. He told them that in advance, and they did. And by the way, the siege of Jerusalem is a terrible thing to read about. They destroyed Jerusalem, and the Jews went into captivity. Now, but you see, the pattern is the same. Bad decision. Mm-hmm. You ally yourself with Egypt when you could have been safe, relatively. You had to pay high taxes, but relatively safe as part of the Babylonian Empire. No, they didn't do it. I would argue the same thing happened to the leadership in Jesus Christ's day. He warned them. And now what Christ said, when you read all Matthew 12 and other parts, he told their leaders, religious leaders, you don't have to believe in me, because it was prophesied that they wouldn't believe in Christ. But you cannot be attacking the work of God. If God's Spirit is doing something, you can't call the work of the devil. And they did a lot of stuff and said things that were over the top. And he warned them, you're getting close to committing the unpardonable sin. I think they got in such a bad attitude that God let them do something really stupid. Why don't you look at John 12:40 for a minute?
He has blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, lest they should see with their eyes, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I should heal them. These things Isaiah said. Nevertheless, even among the rulers, many believed in him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue.
Now, this is interesting. I would make the argument that even though some of them deep down knew he was telling the truth, they were afraid to say anything publicly. They pretended to go along with the bad leadership. This guy on Christian radio was complaining about liberal pastors. He says, well, if you're afraid to say anything for real godly marriage, and he rattled off, or afraid to say anything against abortion, what good are you?
Yeah.
Yeah, most of our leaders in Congress are not any good for anything. I'm sorry to say.
You want to elaborate, Michael?
People in those positions, if you can't take a stand on the clear words of the Bible and godly principles, then yeah, I'd say what good is it? If there's so much social pressure to to conform or to not say anything that's out of line, that I feel like it's pushing a lot of people down. But in some ways, I feel like a lot of religion has gone along willingly, in that people who simply want to be successful, prophesy easy things, stuff that, tells people that, sure, everything that you're doing right now is great. And, I get, come as you are. Yeah, by all means, come as you are. But then the whole obligation is to be better, is to be, your best self, and leave the old man behind and be renewed, and so on and so forth. And that's sort of left out of it. And we're just stuck with what passes for Christianity is simply about just believing, and only believing, and feeling good about it and going on about your business. It reeks of hypocrisy, which is what Christ's accusation against the Pharisees was, that they were doing it their own way. Like, a lot of this has been about doing it your own way instead of doing it God's way, and it certainly applies in this scenario.
Yeah, there's a church down north of Dayton. It's called Only Believe Ministries. I always wanted to walk in there on a Sunday and holler, "Only believe what?" I mean, you should just go home. Believe. Then why do you need to come here? Why do you need to go to church if you believe?
Maybe you believe you need to go there too.
I don't know. It could be it. They only believe this is where you drop your money. That's what they believe.
Yeah.
And one of our premises is that if you start getting away from God, you start making bad cultural decisions that mess up marriage and society. And you hear stories that people can't find good mates anymore. And maybe that depends on who you are and where you are and all that. But you hear stories like that. I think, well, something is wrong in the dating world. I mean, you hear stories like, well, how true it is at my age, I can't really know. But the point is, the culture seems to be decaying in ways that are hard to explain.
Well,
but I would also argue the foreign policy decisions are going to also suffer. Let's take the case of the Jews in Christ's day. The Jews twice rebelled against the Roman Empire. Let me put that in context. If you looked at the Roman Empire, during the days of Christ and the decades following him, the Roman Empire controlled the world from the border of Scotland, which they didn't think was worth the trouble. They could have gotten up there, but they didn't want to get in the mountains. From the border of Scotland, and that included Portugal, all of North Africa, Spain, Egypt, Ethiopia, and some of those surrounding areas, all of the Middle East, much of Eastern and Central Europe, and they didn't get into Persia, but right up to the border. All of that was part of the Roman Empire, and that's where most of the civilization of the world was in those days. And the Roman legions were like weapons of mass destruction. Well, if you go into the Punic Wars with their big rival, when they finally knocked them out, they totally it's now Tunisia, but it wasn't called that then. They totally destroyed the landscape, planted salt and everything. And that part of the world still looks like, in my opinion, horrible. And when they destroyed Jerusalem, they also plowed salt in the surrounding area. That part of the world, I know the Jews have been improving it, so I'm not. But it still looks to some extent like, compared to what the descriptions are anciently, it still looks like crap. Think about the Jews thinking they could defeat the Roman Empire. You see how stupid that is? It's like Napoleon blundering deeper into Russia in the dead of winter. You talk about stupid. That is stupid. And by the way, when the Romans pulled back from the city of Jerusalem, the Jews celebrate, we won, we won. The Christians remembered what Christ said, and they got out of there, went to the hills. What happened is Titus was bringing more siege engines and more legions from all over the empire. He's bringing in reinforcements. You imagine how the Jews felt when a little while later, all of a sudden, a bigger Roman army with siege engines, because Jerusalem's a tough city to take, showed up. How scary that would have been. And if you read Josephus about the siege of Jerusalem, 69, 70 AD, it will scare you how horrible it was. What I'm saying, the Jews made a horrible decision. That's about as dumb as you can get. And you agree?
They made a terrible decision, but based upon their misconception that they had God on their side. They thought God was on their side, not realizing out of their own conceit and arrogance that they weren't obedient to God. They killed the Son of God. And because they adhered to their traditions more than they did to God's laws. But they didn't see that because they were blinded, as Isaiah said. And so they made the mistake of going to war with the strongest empire in the world because they thought they had God on their side. We, in this country, went to war with the most powerful empire on the face of the earth when we went to the Revolutionary War. But we did so from a different viewpoint and from a different standing. We had God on our side. I believe that.
By the way, did you know that in much of America, until after the Civil War, Christmas was illegal?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the battle that turned the tide was when George Washington launched a Christmas offensive. I think it was Trenton, New Jersey, because he knew they would be hungover because of drunk from Christmas Eve drinking. But Americans didn't keep Christmas. So most people don't know that. I mean, relatively speaking, the Puritans are the major group that started America. They were very biblical. They didn't call themselves Puritans or nothing. Of course, the king didn't like them. It's a big story in England, how the problems. But they said, we're going to follow the Bible in a pure form. At least they tried to obey the Bible, Old and New Testament, as best they understood it. Some were Sabbath keepers, by the way. Not all, but they, anyway, thought I'd mention that. America was, by the way, people who say God was not on America's side, you read American history carefully. It was 13 not unified colonies on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains. And, up until 1790s when they finally got the better constitution. And George Washington, the first president. Within 50 or so years, that little group conquered, got some breaks. They went all the way to the Pacific Ocean. From just 13 little colonies on the other side of the Appalachian Mountain. And then in another 40 years, they picked up Hawaii, Midway, and Guam, which is right near the Chinese coast, and the Philippines. I'm probably forgetting a few. America became an empire and economically probably the biggest economic engine in the whole world by 1898. That's less than 100 years, maybe a little more, when they finally got the Constitution working. Now you're going to tell me that's purely, that's all luck? Does that make any sense?
Well, a lot of people will want to think that we did that. That, of course, we did the work, but God was the blessing behind all that work. But today, people will tell you, "Oh, we have all this greatness in this country because of our own intelligence and our own knowledge and our own hard work." Strictly, without acknowledging the blessings that God has given us, and He's the power behind all that.
And you could make an argument, because I had a teacher in Ohio, and she made us make, this is long, wagon trains and talked about the people that crossed the Appalachian and all the frontier thinking. And that shows you how long ago I went to school. I know, I'm sure it's different now. But people carried Bibles and guns with them when they crossed the frontier. Literally, Bibles, and it's written up that way. I'm not saying they were perfect. That, of course, is not the case. But they had relatively strong biblical family values and believed in Protestant work ethic. Maybe that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
But the Bible principles help them be good pioneers.
And probably sincere intentions as well. I mean, so many people that came and settled, did so to have that in the background, to be able to follow their own conscience, which is something, it's easy to take for granted now.
As far as the American Indians go, there are people with American Indian heritage backgrounds from all over Central America trying to get into America. And they're trying to get into America. They know the American Indians have a good deal. Obviously, there are tons of reservations all over this country, but I'm going, that's maybe a whole nother issue. So they didn't get rid of the Indians. They just, well, a lot of them blended into regular society, and they were encouraged to do that. But even those who wanted to keep all their stuff together, there are reservations all over this country where they can do whatever they want. In other words, relative to other countries like the Spanish, America was kind, relatively speaking. You could argue about every war has its good or bad side. You want to hear something interesting? I know it's time to quit. I took the grandkids up on the 4th of July or 3rd of July, whatever it was, to get, because they didn't live too far from Gettysburg, a battleground museum. And we went to the museum where they enacted the Battle of Gettysburg. And I asked the historian after, I said, well, wait a minute. Where's General Custer? He actually did the most essential thing. And he stopped the cavalry from coming behind the Union. I'm going to all the details. He actually, you could say, almost more than anybody, helped win the battle. And historians say, yeah, that's true. But the people who made this, whatever that little thing, it's kind of all animated, they left Custer out because he was involved in Indian wars, and that's now politically incorrect. And I'm saying to myself, I said to him, history should not be altered because of political correctness. The guy agreed with me, but said, well, what can I do? I just work here.
Yeah, yeah.
That's how bad education's gotten. They're messing with history because somebody was involved in Indian wars. Well, you know, I guess you could argue all that kind of stuff. Oh, well.
Well, and the sad thing is, if they're exposed to the truth, they'll reject it. I mean, they'll say, no, he wasn't. He wasn't in it. He didn't have anything to do with that because that's not what I've been taught.
Yeah, they took him out. I told my grandkids that, so they knew the truth, but everybody else didn't even know. Custer wasn't even there. You could argue maybe his contribution wasn't the key, but it certainly was one of the keys because General Lee was expecting Jeb Stuart's cavalry, which is very good, to come in behind the Union lines and attack them just as Pickett came up the other side. But it was Custer's Michigan cavalry and some others that helped him that blocked him, that stopped him from getting there. And timing is everything in battle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's bad that they're perverting history to make America look bad. Oh, you're mean to the Indians. I'm not trying to oversimplify American Indian wars and Indian history. Everything's complicated. But the point is, they're not telling people the truth for politically correct reasons.
Right. You know, I don't know why it's only this country where we do that with the Indians. I mean, they talk about how we stole it, this and that. Are we going to give France back to the Visigoths? I mean, nobody complains about that, right? Nobody says, hey, we should go find some Visigoths and turn France back over to them. So why do they do that here?
The Anglo-Saxons took the British Isles from the Picts. And the Irish took Ireland from Frogs, some name like that. I'm not making this up.
Every country has taken the country from someone else that was there before them. Every single one on the planet.
Migration is such that big countries migrate and they push out or chase out, whatever it is, some weaker powers. By the way, do you know some Indian tribes wiped out other Indian tribes?
Oh, yeah. And some Indian tribes were cannibals, too.
Oh, I'm still reading the book because it got boring, but I read most of the good parts. Do you know that it's called 1491? And this pattern is unbelievable. All the great Indian empires, like the Incas and the others, they had brutal internal warfare, internecine warfare, just before the Spanish got there, weakening them. Even in the case of the Pilgrims, I'm going to get my names right, the Iroquois League was pushing on Chief Massaquoi Indians of Massachusetts. And when he saw them unload cannons and guns, because they were watching the Mayflower, that guy spying on him, he realized, those guys have us outnumbered and they're pushing us. they're going to wipe us out or do us in or whatever, we're going to need allies. So so allies of the Pilgrim. Then they got Squanto, great translator, and the rest is history. And the pattern is the same, all the empires. So, the Spanish were much more cruel than the Anglo-Saxons. And then that's a whole nother story. My only point is, there are no easy good guys, bad guys in a simplistic way that they like to teach history.
Yep.
And America's a much nicer country than they give credit for. I know I've gotten off the topic, but like you said, Tom, I think God blessed America's political decisions because we were, for the most part, more on God's side than the other nations were.
Yeah, let's hopefully we can kind of go back that other direction again. We'll see.
Yeah, if we keep going back the other way, they're going to keep making stupid decisions like how we left Afghanistan. Well, thank you, Michael and Tom and Ken.
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Sabbath, and we'll see you back here again next week. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
We're happy you could make it, and so glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.